So we will go ahead and get started here. My name is Alexis Mason, and most people call me Lex. I am Master of Social Work student here at Troy University in Troy, Alabama. And today I'm excited to facilitate a discussion about the emphasis on youth, specifically women's body dissatisfaction in those later adulthood years. So think 65 and up. Before we get started with the presentation and discussion for today, I'll close out of the PowerPoint because I want to show just a short clip, and the clip pretty well encompasses kind of the global holistic approach that we'll take when talking about body dissatisfaction, specifically in those later adulthood years for our aging women.
Well, I spend a lot of time thinking about how much I hate my body and my mind, and it's changing. And I'm not at the acceptance level yet with it. I find it really painful. I also have a lot of depression and was suicidal for a while. And now I'm experiencing a great deal of anxiety, and I find it hard to leave the house.
All right, so as you saw, pretty powerful clip, the narrator in that clip talking about, again, more global, holistic feelings of depression, anxiety, some loneliness, particularly in and following menopause. So again, we'll discuss this global perspective, internal perspective when we focus on body dissatisfaction in later adulthood for women. So International Women's Day in 2025 was on March 8th. And the theme for this past year's Remembrance Day or Celebration Day was rights for all women and girls, equality and empowerment. And so, for the purpose of this discussion today, I really want to focus in on that word empowerment, or to empower somebody. To empower is to give someone authority to do something, or to make someone more confident, especially in controlling their life. So, with the social and political climate we're in today, aging women reaching back to empowering younger generations of women and girls, taking control of their own lives, that can be described to many or as brave and inspiring. So it's a beautiful process to experience seeing this increase of civic engagement, especially from older women during this time. But still, women are under social pressures each day to maintain status quo, maintain this thin ideal or physique or otherwise. Social forces influence women's body image quite a bit, and ultimately, they do influence body satisfaction or dissatisfaction in women as a holistic concept for older women every day. From media to adopting perpetually harmful stereotypes, to older adults being left isolated to live alone, the way we treat our older women in society directly reflects how we see them. So let's go over our learning objectives for today. First, we're going to talk about the topic. Let's define what later adulthood is before we get into the emphasis on youth. Then we'll talk about women's body image and what does the data support about this. We'll talk about the impacts on this emphasis on youth, physically, socially, mentally, emotionally, and also occupationally and financially, with special focus on capitalistic societies because we are in a Western society that focuses on capitalism. Lastly, we're going to talk about taking action. We'll talk about creating positive change, a little bit about body positivity, also combating harmful stereotypes, and from a social work perspective, We'll talk about some therapeutic intervention as well. So, in this last segment of human development, which is later adulthood, we really live our lives in alignment with how we spent our past. And like in any stage in human development, once we turn 65, there are still some unique physical and biological transitions left to take place. We'll discuss those in the coming slides here, as I mentioned. But body image and dissatisfaction are holistically impactful and a unique experience. So it has an effect on women physically as well as their mental and emotional health. In 2015, according to Dr. Charles Zastrow and some other associated professionals, on average, women lived up to 5 years longer than their male peers. This data is fairly well supported across research platforms, and that's due to a plethora of evidence of male tendencies to take more risks in their youth, as well as data suggesting that men are more prone to chronic conditions such as heart disease, which unfortunately lead to earlier passings. For example, you'll see for every 136 women left widowed, there's 100 men left as widowers. Now, that doesn't mean that aging women don't experience health issues. It might just mean that there's limited data to suggest other information. The higher population of women to men might skew these data sets, or there might be other variables that aren't mentioned in some of the research that's out there. So 30 years of later adulthood. Because later adulthood does span those 30 years, geriatric providers are constantly seeking ways to address medical issues for older adults, whether that be mobility issues or this air of cognitive decline. Geriatric providers are seeking ways to attack those with their patients. Contrary to popular belief, though, going into older adulthood does not automatically mean physical or cognitive decline. In fact, in the US, our aging population is more healthy, larger, and younger at heart than at any time in history. Generally, women and men experience aging really similarly. Their blood vessels are enlarging, the skin's becoming more elastic, or what we might know as wrinkles, and fat redistributes throughout the body, and that's according to the Mayo Clinic. Some thinking patterns start to shift, but not in the way you might think. Cognitive decline might be a sign of aging, but usually these thinking patterns are associated with slower reaction times. And the most well known illustration of this is probably when you see an older person actually driving the speed limit on the highway, or when they come to a complete stop before they turn. Contrarily to men, though, women experience body transitions such as menopause, which can last anywhere from 5 to 15 years until fully transition through that experience. So during this research for this final, I was speaking to anonymous women who agreed to contribute to this discussion. And I asked one participant what, if any, factors influence women's self image or self esteem. She told me in part that while she was shopping with her granddaughter, a thought that came to her head was, I want to wear something sexy, but it doesn't look good on me. And I thought that was really powerful because this worldview highlights social work's definition of body image as the subjective experience and thoughts around our own bodies. So, body image is not just how we see ourselves physically, but it's also how we feel about ourselves internally. It's influenced by media, cultural norms, and these impacts affect our behaviors and our social functioning altogether. Most notably, when women don't meet societal expectations, especially about beauty, But among other criteria as well, they're devalued. Women's value historically is really utilitarian. So as they age, their value in society goes down. Think about childbearing or physical attractiveness in patriarchal societies or capitalistic tactics to get women to buy into youth, division of labor. Those are all examples of women's valuation in society and how they impact body image and dissatisfaction in all age ranges, but in particular later adulthood. And we'll talk more about that as well. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes, the emphasis on youth. How do women feel about their value in society as they age? Again, women's value in society is very utilitarian. And although they may feel satisfied with how they look as they age, generally women feel less body satisfaction within the context of functionality. In this verse from Genesis 3:16, "In pain you shall bring forth children," it illustrates the increased suffering for women through childbirth. And it's believed by some, and goodquestions.org actually reported too, that this passage gives credence to men's control over women's bodies. And it's suggesting that God clarified to Eve that desiring her husband is sin, and it'll be an ongoing conflict for her. So others might believe too that the passage means women are going to desire control over their husbands, but the husbands are going to rule over them. And with this suggested rule over women's bodies by men, Anshu Patel and colleagues research that as women age, although visually they may feel heightened senses of body dissatisfaction, or satisfaction rather, overall body dissatisfaction in other areas of human development do grow, such as mentally and emotionally. So, in childbearing, remember that Erikson's theory of development focused on individual needs versus societal expectations. In later adulthood, this is integrity versus despair. And we're not talking about integrity as in doing the right thing when nobody's watching. In this theory, integrity is described as a wholeness or a value or purpose in life, like living with no regrets. Women living without children in a 2005 study in Belgium, they were actually found to be living with these feelings of integrity despite perceived expectations to bear children to increase their social relevance or value. And I want to note too that this study was conducted in 2005. So take it with a grain of salt. It's widely known that studies on body image in midlife and late adulthood remain underrepresented, particularly when discussing objectification or self-objectification. Nonetheless, Fredrickson and Roberts coined the objectification theory in 1997. They hypothesized that women's bodies are viewed as objects or tools to be evaluated. This theory may lead to self-objectification, or in other words, and like we talked about before, the way we treat aging women in society reflects exactly how we see them, as either usable or not. When objectification or self-objectification occurs, negative self-talk or cognitive distortions may increase, especially in congruence with societal beauty expectations not being met. So, Shauna Frisbee on her website posted that the effects of social media use on mental health are an area of ongoing research and concerns for clinicians and the public. But we know that human beings are visual learners and social beings. We care a lot about what other people think about us. But as far as media goes, I know I'd rather see my grandmother depicted as her jovial, creative, lively self in media versus a curmudgeon Wicked Witch. I'd rather see her as Betty White. The misrepresentation of women in later adulthood in media causes damage to society's impression of older women and their own internal body image. As social workers, our clients are never too old for role models. So, figures like the late Betty White are great examples of positive role models older women can emulate versus characters who are depicted as hermits, grumpy, senile, or lonely. Think Yzma from Emperor's New Groove. So, we talked about women's value in society, and we were able to go through and define what later adulthood is. Now I want to talk a little bit about what does the data support about this emphasis on youth. We talked about later adulthood or the last stage in human development, and we discussed women's transitions in later adulthood, such as the process of menopause and some other things like body dissatisfaction as it relates to self objectification. So let's discuss what the data actually says. Body dissatisfaction in older women. So, although there is data to support otherwise, there was a study conducted between 25 and 86-year-old women that found that women aged 61 and up had the highest percentage of endorsing extreme body dissatisfaction. Further, an Australian study in women aged 50 to 86 found that negative body image in this age cohort directly impacted quality of life and psychosocial functioning. So, I'm curious what else we can discover. What are the physical impacts of body dissatisfaction? The physical age-related changes that prompt older women to deviate from Western feminine societal beauty standards, they've been shown to be negatively associated with their self-perceptions, as in, when women decide they want to deviate from Western beauty standards, they're villainized, they become socially irrelevant, or they just feel worse about themselves because of what they're hearing. Older women have reported also engaging in dieting culture, thin idealism, and beauty work, such as the use of hair dye, makeup, anti wrinkle creams, surgical and non surgical cosmetic procedures to retain their femininity and physical attractiveness. They want to avoid the effects of ageism and being socially invisible. Ageism is also pervasive in medical care. As women age, there's a perception that both mental and physical health for women are normal. Women's views on aging can sometimes be seen as a self fulfilling prophecy. So, if you think it, you can be it. If you dream it, you can do it. Negative global self perception leads to increased stress, health barriers, and cognitive decline in women, just as it does in their male counterparts. An anonymous participant in this research study told me society, social media, entertainment, and employment cater to men and a man's point of view. In my opinion, I think this facilitates the feeling of irrelevance and feeling undesirable. What does the data support and tell us about the social impacts of body dissatisfaction in later adulthood? So, about 1 in 4 women aged 55 and up, a little bit younger, provide some form of unpaid caregiving each day. Remember, we talked about women being objectified and their value being very utilitarian in society. 2.3 million children are raised by single grandmothers. And 1 in 5 are raised in poverty. So 1 in 5 of those family units are living below the poverty line. In 2023, AARP found that 16% of working older women stopped working to focus on caregiving to others, whether that be a spouse or adult child or someone else in their life. And a quarter of caregivers have less than $1,000 saved, but they are more likely to say that they're in debt and are in poor health. Emotional and mental impacts of body dissatisfaction in women in later adulthood. Beauty standards coexist with social expectations about physical appearance. These are not congruent with the natural aging process. Negative self evaluation is linked to depression, anxiety, a negative sense of self, and cognitive distortions or cognitive dissonance. Another anonymous participant told me current political initiatives seem to be anti woman. It would be better, in my opinion, to normalize and allow older, successful women to be shown as role models of all shapes and sizes. Imagine how that might change the narrative around emotional and mental health support for women in that age cohort. Again, older women are often caregivers to adult children, spouses, or even older relatives. All the while, the risk of Alzheimer's disease is twice as likely to occur in lonely older adults. By the way, 2/3 of dementia patients are women. Although the onset usually occurs around 51 for menopause, it usually lasts 5 to 7 years, but for some, menopause can last up to 15 years. One of the side effects or one of the situations that women will go through during menopause are hormonal changes in the brain. And that's something to pay attention to as social workers, because when we implement therapeutic intervention for women who are in that later adulthood phase, we should be mindful of the impacts of menopause and how they impact older women's mental and emotional health as well. So, occupational and financial impacts. So, the capitalistic feminist theory. Karl Marx developed a theory of labor in capitalistic societies where he said there's an inherent conflict between the rich and the poor, specifically regarding the exploitation of the poor. The rich basically siphon the underpaid labor of the poor for profit. So it's like reverse Robin Hood. Examples of free labor by women are housework and childcare. Societal hierarchies allow for women to work in this way while basing their value on the level of production by others. In other words, outside influences are allowed by society to dictate how valuable women's work is, although it's unpaid, if that makes sense. Additional impacts of occupational and financial nature. Someone told me, I used to be okay with being a housewife, a mother, and living off my husband's one income. Now that I've graduated college and have my own career, I feel independent. I feel worthy. Another person said, I'm not overly mistreated by the men I work with, but due to the areas we work in, I feel like an outsider. The intersectionality of ageism and sexism in the workplace uniquely impact women in all age groups. Since more women have steadily entered the workforce since the 70s, they really do continue to struggle with pay inequity and ageism. And sexism and ageism and how they intersect negatively impact the workforce, driving higher range of depression, isolation, while also increasing toxic work environments. So, what does the data support about occupational and financial impacts of body dissatisfaction in later adult women? 70% of Black women over 50 report workplace discrimination in 2022. Over 60% of workers 50 and over have experienced workplace discrimination. According to the Department of Labor as well, over 2 million women and over 330,000 men work as nurses. And that was as of 2019. However, most women make about $5,000 less than their male counterparts annually during that time. So there's still some wage discrimination between men and women, regardless of how long they've been in the field, based on their sex. Ageism in the workplace. So remember, ageism is having negative images of and attitudes towards people simply because they are old. Older employees are often assessed lower than their younger colleagues, despite showing no difference in qualifications or performance. In 2021, AARP did another study, and they found that women facing ageism in the workplace struggle to find work for equal pay outright. And according to Cecil in 2022, young based appearance standards are also a source of stress for older female workers. So think about the compounding factors there. You've got women in the workplace stressed, you've got the compounding factor of income inequality, and you've got the factor of societal expectations of this emphasis on youth, drawing down on women. So now that we've talked about the definition of later adulthood, what women's value in society is, and the impacts on this view on value in society, let's talk about what we can do to address this as social workers and just as citizens. First, we can jump into recognizing harmful stereotypes. Recognizing and addressing harmful stereotypes and behaviors towards the aging population would set anyone up to empower themselves and others to stand up against ageism, which, remember, is discrimination against people strictly because of their age. For social workers specifically, the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, it charges all of us to advocate for all marginalized and oppressed communities, including our aging population. As social work professionals specifically in the workplace and in our unique field, we can combat ageism by bringing it to the table in those diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility boardrooms and departments. We have to be honest. The fact is, the baby boomer generation makes up a large portion of our parents and grandparents. They're the generation that will make up that expansive population growth that's predicted in 2030, 2040, and so on. So remaining sensitive to how we implement anti-oppressive practice in the aging community, especially for female clients and those intersecting identities, will only increase our competence in our own social work practice. We can act online. Keep in mind that no one is ever at zero risk for developing an eating disorder or mental health barriers, aging women included. The fact is, too, that we live in a digital world. So online resources such as the National Eating Disorder Association, My Body, My Image, or others offer a host of tools that promote body positivity and positive self-help, combating harmful stereotypes. Social policy. As social workers, in order to advance social policy, we need to remain aware of organizations like the Gina Davis Institute, which has launched a global study to analyze intersectionality of ageism and sexism and its pervasiveness worldwide. The Institute also found that female characters over 50 are grossly underrepresented in the media, which is coming to feel like a source problem in how women view themselves. When they are represented in the media, they're cast to be as senile, feeble, and homebound compared to their male counterparts. The National Association of Social Workers recognizes May as Older American Month, alongside the Administration for Community Living. In 2024, the NASW actually published a journal titled NASW Tips and Tools for Social Workers, Older Americans Month 2024. What is the NASW doing to support social work with older adults? They described in that journal mental health workshops and fellow organizations dedicated to advocacy and support of our aging population. From a social work perspective, examples on how social workers specifically can deliver anti-oppressive practice to aging women include some examples below. We have to understand the psychological undertakings of later adulthood, like Erikson's theory on integrity versus despair, and other significant life events like menopause or losing a loved one. When we practice a strengths based approach as well, when working with aging clients, we can help them focus on being healthy, we can help them with social and interpersonal relationships to combat that loneliness and depression. And lastly, we can assist clients with developing new hobbies or interests. So, what did we learn today? Women's body dissatisfaction in later adulthood is a globally shared experience. And although not perceived exclusively physically, body dissatisfaction holds correlations with self worth, self image, and mental health challenges as they relate to how women show up in the world. To combat body dissatisfaction in aging women, social work professionals can help with treating symptoms of anxiety and depression, as well as helping them connect with resources for social support. So, I hope through today's discussion, you did learn something about body dissatisfaction in women in later adulthood, and I do thank you for participating. Thanks so much.